for the ALF administrators and employees. So without me taking any more time, Tom is going to go through his spiel. As a normal process, we are big into questions. Reminder of a couple rules. We don't use names or direct anybody in regards to anything. We just say facility or client or patient or doctor. And Tom, are you okay with them asking questions as we go, or do you want them at the end? What would you prefer?
I'm always open to questions, and it's an open forum. I really, to be honest with you, to tell them everything that's in my head would take a couple of days, because there's all kinds of issues. So what I'll probably do on the front end is take care of some general things, you know, the good, the bad, and avoid the ugly part. And then, yeah, I'm always open for questions, you know, any time, and I'll give you some information. So I'm going to go ahead, and my slideshow is up. Am I correct?
Nope. I think we got to do something to get it. Oh, wait, maybe I'm doing something wrong.
You'll need to reshare it, Tom. That green button.
Okay, got you. Okay. This one. There it is. Now, can you see it?
We can see it.
Okay, perfecto. All righty then. So, you know, and again, Teresa reached out to me a while back and said that they would like to talk, you know, asked me to speak, and I'm honored for that. And I've known Nick and Teresa for a long, long time. And my experience goes back a long, long time. Somebody mentioned 1991, and that would be the first time I ever took core training in the state of Florida. I always remember, I tell people I was 12 years old, but that wouldn't be true. I've been in healthcare for a long time, since 1985, because I spent several years before that working with the mental health population, not only a year of inpatient psych, but 10 years at a private facility in Fern Park. So I've got a lot of different background. I've built and operated ALFs. I currently have a management company. We manage 2 properties in the state, one out in Sanford and the other one in Key West. We are on islands, funnily enough. We're thinking we're going to call ourselves Island Management before it's over, because if they build one on Sanibel and I can manage that, I'll be all for it.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, just really quickly, the titles: navigating licenses and care levels, understanding documentation, regulations, requirements, reviewing best practices for facility conflict resolution. And the reality is, I probably couldn't tell you everything on my mind about these. So I'm going to go through some slides real quick. And here's a little bit again about myself. One thing I will share with you, and I believe I've had Teresa on the show before, is I do a monthly radio show. It's called the Tom Radio Webinar Show, and it's a monthly webinar for ALF professionals. It's free, and it's really geared towards ALF administrators who come out, and we try to give them updated on the latest and greatest information, because I just be honest with you, I'm certified as an ALF trainer through the Agency for Healthcare Administration, as all other certified core trainers are in the state. And so I am certified through the agency to teach the certification class for ALF administrators. And I've been doing that for about 23 years. And actually before that with Department of Elder Affairs and some limited type training. So, you know, every month people come out and they get to listen to me talking to them. And of course we do have a website, which if you screenshot it, or I actually have some PDFs available, I'm going to make available after this class, and they can disseminate that. But you can, as I say on my show, you can always check us out at www.tomcampbellalftrainer.com. I'm practicing my radio voice so that I can retire and start voiceovers. I always do a disclaimer at every training I teach, because of a couple of reasons. Number one, I'm not an attorney, nor am I a CPA. I'm just a high school graduate that grew up in assisted living. And basically what I mean by that, when I moved to Florida 30 something or whatever, 35 years ago, that's what I mean growing up. So I'm not really into talking about any kind of legal stuff. I don't hold myself out as an attorney, but I do teach the ALF regulations, and I've been teaching that for 23 years. So I read the regulations for assisted living at least once a month, and for many years, twice a month, because that's what I teach people. And I can just share with you, in 23 years of teaching, I can tell you not everybody I taught gets it, has gotten it. And I'm not certain I could tell you honestly that every ALF corporation in the state of Florida gets it. Many of you probably know that. But that is one thing I want to tell you. I do like, and I have a sense of humor. I promise I won't swear. I've been getting better at that. And so if you have any questions or comments, again, and any opinions I offer during today's presentation are not necessarily those of the people who have invited me today, nor the people who sponsor some of my training programs, nor the people who even work for me, who sometimes wonder what I'm thinking when I talk. So that's the disclaimer. Many of you probably know a little bit about licensure. Let me go back a second. One of the things we do other than manage is I have a whole consulting division, and we do ALF compliance in the state of Florida. And that compliance either is because we have clients who have us come in to make sure that we ensure that they're aspiring to follow the regulations and, of course, provide good care. And then we have the ones that we get phone calls from that are in litigation with the state of Florida, and they are required to hire a consultant as a condition of their settlement agreement to keep their license. And I have done several of those across the state, which was kind of unusual for me to hear that we have a large majority of people in today's chat from the Pensacola area, but that's another story. And so I do get around and I do get to see ALFs, and I know as guardians and case managers and care managers, you get around to see them too. There are over 3,000 standard licensed ALFs in the state of Florida, and they range anywhere from 4 or 5 beds all the way up to hundreds of beds. And I've assisted many people in licensing those facilities from 200 beds and even greater. So one of the things we do is to go in and do that. But the other licensures are limited nursing service, extended congregate care, and limited mental health. And these are what we call specialty licenses. And these licenses, especially the LNS or limited nursing service and the ECC, these two specialty licenses are additional levels of care and regulations in addition to the standard license that we have. Now, I went online to see if I could find out the numbers for these facilities in the state of Florida, and they're not posting it right now anymore, but you're going to see in a minute where you'll be able to go and look at some resources, because I'm also a resource person, and I like to, not only when I train and I speak to people, I like to offer them some resources to go back and fall back on if they need be, because I'm sure as guardians you do a lot of research, and I believe, and again, I think part of what makes your profession great as others is when there's an exchange of information and people get to talk. Limited nursing allows a nurse who works in an ALF to provide any nursing service other than skilled nursing. Anything that is skilled nursing in an ALF has to be, or anything that is skilled nursing would have to be done in a skilled nursing facility. There is only one exception. And the only exception to that is if that resident is on hospice. This is one of those points that a lot of people do not understand. And we had changes in hospice regulations last year that allow us to admit a hospice resident who is bedridden. Previously, we could never admit a person under hospice unless they met the standards for admission to an ALF. The thinking at the state level on that was if a person could go on to hospice and stay bedridden under hospice under continued residency, why couldn't they do that for admission? So there was a change there. That admission to hospice does allow skilled nursing, but only by an outside third party. And this is the thing.
So Tom, do you mean that the outside third-party nursing is just from the hospice provider or elsewhere?
It could be, okay, so anybody that goes on to hospice has to have an interdisciplinary care plan. It is a requirement. And that interdisciplinary care plan is supposed to be done in consultation with the ALF so that everybody sits down like good case managers and care planners do and have an intelligent conversation on what needs to happen moving forward and who is going to provide what. My point is, as an ALF administrator, I could accept somebody under hospice who received 24-hour nursing supervision as long as it was done by an outside third party. That could be a home health agency. It could be the hospice provider. That is the whole point of the care plan.
But 24 hours supervision means what?
Skilled nursing care.
So we've got a client coming from the hospital. They are bedridden, meet the criteria for hospice, get signed up with hospice, come to your building, meet all the criteria, get the interdisciplinary plan done. Hospice can't guarantee us 24-hour access to an LPN or an RN.
Okay, I mean, I'll stop you there.
Okay.
Okay. I was spouting law and rule. Okay. In every regulation that Florida has, at the very beginning of the regulations, they have what's called definitions. And it's a section of the regulations a lot of people don't read because they think it's words and words that have many meanings. So when I use the term 24-hour nursing supervision, by regulation, it means services that required licensed personnel or medical personnel for safe and effective performance required at the bedside, authorized by a physician, and under the definition of skilled nursing, that is 24-hour nursing supervision. Now, that means skilled nursing care. There's a difference between 24-hour nurse staffing, which would be a nurse on staff 24 hours a day, which a lot of ALFs do not support as part of their programs. And for 24-hour nursing or act from hospice, if you're referring to crisis care, that's a whole other thing. And frankly, quite frankly, with crisis care, in my humble opinion, it's oversold sometimes by hospice providers and is not understood by the end receivers, including the ALFs, who expect that there's going to be a nurse on staff 24/7 and crisis care is perpetual, and when it's not. And that is the whole reason why formulating a interdisciplinary care plan with your hospice is so important. It's something that I stress. And I do work with a hospice provider here locally. I won't mention their name because I'm not promoting them, as I tell people why, while they do support what I do, and you'll find their information on my website, I tell people, despite the fact maybe I like this provider and I know the reasons why, I think people need to use providers who provide good resident care, okay, to your wards and to any resident of an ALF, and then provide good support services in conjunction with what the ALF or even a nursing home would do. I mean, the thing that baffles me, quite honestly, to all of you is why these problems happen in ALFs if people just use their head a little bit and think about things and really just sit down and communicate. Because I find the major issues across the board that I see always start with no communication. So extended congregate care allows total help with ADLs and nursing, the same as LNS. And there are not a lot of facilities out there these days. And the thing about these two licenses is that with some good care management and some third-party service providers, ALFs really don't have to even have these. And by the way, these are voluntary. These aren't required. And they've changed over the years. And most people utilize them to market as much as anything else. A nurse in an ALF today can do more today than they ever could have done 10 years ago. They can even change a Band-Aid for a minor cut or abrasion. 2 years ago, they had to have an LNS or ECC license or home health come in and do it, which is absolutely absurd and ridiculous, because now I'm sure they were coding it under Medicare under something else on simple wound care. And I'm sure the federal government doesn't like all that, yada, yada, yada. So again, and I've had ECC. I teach this class. It's a 4-hour class. I've taught it since 2003. And I'll just tell you, it was legislated by law in 1991. And if we had not have done this in 1991, residents today could not age in place, and we would not have we would have very few dementia-specific ALFs because a resident prior to 1991 could not age in place. And here I'll just give you this little last nugget. If a resident was incontinent and could not manage their incontinence independently, they couldn't live in an ALF. They had to go to a nursing home. And when I teach core training or any other professionals, and I tell people that little nugget, they're thinking, wow, I wouldn't have 3/4 of my residents. I wouldn't have a memory care. And if you ever hear the term stand and pivot or weight bearing or non-weight bearing, that's not necessarily a criteria that prevents an admission. A person could be a paraplegic, not bear weight, stand and pivot, but have upper body strength. A resident who can assist with their transfer, who cannot necessarily bear weight or stand and pivot, could still live and reside in an ALF under certain conditions. And here's what I'm getting back to the point Nick made. There are things that ALFs are allowed to do under the regulations, but some of them, well, number one, if the regulations say they shall do it, it's mandatory. So it'd be a mandatory policy. If the regulations say they may do it, may means it's voluntary. So those voluntary things that ALFs may do, there are some ALFs that should never be doing them because they don't have the expertise, the support of licensed professionals to complement or support the services they provide to keep somebody successful. So I get, and I face this with my hospice providers because they know the regulations. One of them I use, they've probably trained 80 of their people in 10 years with me to be administrators. And so they understand the regulations, the majority of them, not saying all of them. And, you know, they're telling me all the time, I know what the regs are, but the ALF's saying we can't do it. And here's the thing, and it's traditional. ALFs who don't want to do something that aren't required to won't admit that they can do them. And they'll probably tell you the state won't allow us just to make you go away because nobody will question that. See, I'm a teacher and of the regs, I would tell you why if I was teaching you. And then with limited mental health, that is a very unique license. And it would take me a day and a half to explain all that to you, but it is one of the biggest issues we have. In my humble opinion, is there are not enough ALFs to deal with that mental health population of people who can't afford private pay. And as long as the state of Florida supports an SSI recipient under OSS for the whopping tune of $78 minus $54 back to that resident, we're going to have less than adequate ALFs. You wouldn't probably want to have anybody in. Again, issues that we deal with every day. The type of residents we serve, we have memory care, we have traumatic brain injury, we have developmentally disabled adults and ALFs. We have ALFs for men, ALFs for women. We have ALFs for people who are Hispanic, ALFs for people from Romania. I mean, we have ALFs for everybody. The concept of assisted living can be applied to a lot of people. My favorite one's called the hippie ALF. Can you imagine a hippie ALF? I've been telling people about this for years, but you know what's funny about this? 78 million people coming around the corner are called baby boomers, and they're not going to be your typical population of people that we have been serving. I call the people we serve today the meat and potatoes crowd, because they were born in the 30s and the 40s and things were different, generational, and everybody knows generational. I'm probably about 5 years on the backside of the hippie generation, though I hung out with that hippie generation, so I consider myself one. But think about it. people, regardless of what you may hear, still want to be with people of their own kind. And we have research already in California, God bless them, that there's ALFs that are actually hippie thinking in their mindset, because these people of that hippie generation wanted to be with people of the same mindset. So it's actually happening. And, you know, there's a couple of things I want to bring up with this change in generational change happening in an ALF real quick. And it is, number one, this new generation of people who are coming around the corner are going to want to be bathed every day, not just 3 times a week. The ALF with 200 people are not going to be able to guarantee me that I'm going to get my shower when I want it every day, when I'm one of those people who wants a shower every day. And they're not going to tell me, hey, Mr. Campbell, you're going to get your shower at 3 a.m. this morning. The hell I will. You know, that's not going to happen. And of course, I tell my students, if I'm 85 in an ALF, I want 2 showers a day, but that's a whole other story. Here's the other thing. That's a care level change. But here's something I talk about to everybody that maybe you faced, and that's what is your medical marijuana policy in an ALF? And when I talked about that 5 years ago, everybody was thinking, well, what is he talking about? We'll never do that. Well, guess what? Things have changed, folks. It's changed. So, you know, the bottom line is that some ALFs have it, some don't. I have one at my ALF. It is very simple. If people understood about medical marijuana and thought about it a little bit and maybe did a little bit of research, they might understand a little bit more about it. It can come in milligrams. It can come in pill form. It can come in a gummy type form. It can come in measurable liquid type form. You know, we don't want to have people smoking flowers, as they call it. When I was a kid, they called them flower tops and then buds, and now they call them flowers. You know, smoking marijuana is something that most ALF policies prohibit. And if it's treated like a prescription drug, and if it's handled by the ALF and treated as a controlled medication that was monitored under supervision at all time, and there was no breach in the chain of custody, then, you know, seriously, if it's a benefit to the resident, why not? But see, here's the thing. This is not a mandatory policy. This is a voluntary policy. And then you may get the occasional ALF that's a Medicaid provider and say, well, we're not allowed to have it because of the federal government. Well, keep your eyes on the news. Some of that's probably going to change, because my understanding is the federal government's going to say, hey, we're going to let the states work it out. All right, here's the regulatory references. And these are things that you have access to. Everything that I talk about on the regulations are here online. And again, I'm doing this as a resource so people can understand, what we operate off of. And you see, the whole function of core training is to teach the minimum standards required by Florida regulations to license and operate an ALF. And for adult family care homes, it's the same thing. And just so for your benefit, Florida Statute 429 is called the Community Homes Act. Okay. And it includes part 1, which is assisted living, part 2, which is adult family care home. And if you really were interested, part 3 is adult daycare centers. Adult family care homes, there's probably 400 or so of those around the state. They're 5 beds or less. The licensee has to live in the house, and they have to take 1 OSS resident. They have to live in the home, so they can't say they live there and they're not there. You will not find somebody who owns a chain of adult family care homes because a licensee can only have 1. Assisted living facilities, again, big or small, I can show you where the regulations are, So the first one is Florida Online Sunshine. This is the state statutes. You could probably you'll find your own statute here. Click on this, it'll tell you, heck, I can look up statutes all the way back to 1997. This is a resource a lot of people do not know or understand. And also, it's also a resource because you can log in to the Florida legislature and put your information in, and it'll notify you during the legislative session of any bills that might be of interest to you, so you can stay tuned to what's coming down the road. So the legislative session just happened and we've had some changes. And by the way, it brings up assisted living facilities and other facilities under health care. The governor signed into law on April 6th. The no patient left alone law signed in April 6th. It required ALFs to have their policy posted on their website by May 6th. They have to develop their policies and procedures in addition to their normal policies and procedures, because this particular law or change in statute deals with extraordinary circumstances like during periods of COVID, or if for some reason, God forbid, a resident is under isolation precautions, but for example, are at end of life and family want to come visit. So the regulations that we have, and this particular one, along with the Resident Bill of Rights that says residents have the right to visitors from 9A to 9P, those are what the ALFs use to develop their policy. And I've been writing a lot of policy these years, and the policies are always grounded in your statutes and your administrative codes, your regulations. That's the core foundation. Rules, which are my favorite, they can be found online at flrules.org. All you have to do is just type in that, and that'll give you a copy. You can download it in Microsoft Word. I joke with people and say, hey, there's things in there I don't like. I can just go in and edit it and use it. Just kidding. But I'm surprised some ALFs haven't tried that one yet. So those are where you can find any regulations. Okay. So even for your own profession, if you probably know better than I do, chapter 765, or I believe that's advanced directives, any of those things like that you can find there. And by the way, this is just facility locator. You can go, and again, you can go and look at any ALF you want by type or location. Like that. I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did I hit the mute?
Oh, okay. I just heard somebody speak, so I thought somebody had a question. All right. So anyway, this is by search by proximity or by location. I do this all the time. I wouldn't know who lives at this house, but I can look up any ALF, and I can do it in a radius. We utilize these for research.
The man heard me talking to you.
So check this out. This is my house in Winter Park, and a 5-mile radius. I have 47 ALFs.
Tom, I can't see that on the screen. Should I be able to see what you're showing right now?
You can't see it?
No, I still see the regulatory references. Is my computer?
Oh, hold on a second. Now?
Yep, see it now.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, folks. Maybe I have too many things open. I don't know. So anyway, this is 5-mile radius of my house. There's 47 ALFs within 5 miles.
Wow.
If I change it to a 10-mile radius, it'll only give me the closest 99
I want to take that and make copies of it and scan it in, and then I'll bring it back to you.
Okay, somebody's talking on the back end.
Carol Hunt, can you mute there we go. Thank you.
So I would like somebody, and this is what I want to be fair, okay? And Teresa, you can't comment, but I want to demonstrate something to everybody, and I want you to look at the screen and randomly pick one of these ALFs so I can click on it and show you the information that's available to you as guardians, care managers, and case managers, just so you know what it means. And I don't want to pick one and be unfair. Anybody?
Mayflower assisted living. Mayflower assisted living.
Okay, the Mayflower. So let me just tell you about the Mayflower. It is a CCRC, continuing care retirement community, which means it's a life care type facility where you have to pay a front end endowment fee. Here's the information that you'll see. And of course, the location, which is not too far from my house. The administrator, the chief financial officer, which is required by law back in 2010, talks about the controlling interest. So you can see it tells you the number of licensed beds, but this is getting ready to change because they're getting ready to add new beds. It tells you when their license was effective, when it expires. And in this particular case, it expired the 12th, and it doesn't mean they allowed it to expire purposely. It means that the agency who surveys for renewal is behind and it's in review. So it's still current. Whenever you say in review, it means that it's usually a timeliness in the licensing issued by the agency, because like for instance, in Jacksonville, there are a lot of them in Jacksonville. Actually, the Jacksonville office, ACA office in Jacksonville is so backed up that people from Jacksonville all the way to Daytona, you'll see, their license is expired and they're having such a problem catching up that's what you'll see. It doesn't mean they've been expired. It just means their ACA is trying to catch up. Now, if it says in litigation, then that means they're under review by the agency. They probably had a revocation order. They probably had a class 1 or multiple class 2s or repeat class 2s and 3s and multiple combinations there from things like failing to honor a DNR order to all kinds of other weirdness, not only everywhere in the state of Florida. So it's not just relegated to one place. And then again, earlier, as I mentioned, I end up, there's a lot of times I get hired in as a consultant to come in and take care of that. I'm getting ready to actually transfer that section of my business over to somebody else, but that's another story. Here's the other thing I want to show you. Here's the inspection results. So that you can go in and see, did they have deficiencies? And just because it says 10 pages doesn't mean that it's bad. It just means that what happened was that the way these regulations set up, or the survey report, it copies and pastes the regulations all the way down for one survey tag, which could be like 5 pages. Okay. So it doesn't mean anything. In this case, you can see they just had their survey back on 3/22. That's their renewal. They corrected their deficiencies. They had 6. And if I went in and I looked at it, it would tell me what the survey report is. Okay. And I guarantee you that most of them are going to be staff training, as this one is. This is pre-service orientation, which is supposed to be done prior to or at time of admission. And then of course, training, there's first aid training. So in their case, they're all class 3s. They're not major deficiencies. If you saw that, I hope you did. That's basically a little bit about that. Now you can go back on that website at any time and check out that information on your own. You can actually see what their whole pattern or trend. Can you see my regulatory reference slide now?
Yeah, we're back to it. Hey, Tom,
Thank you.
I got a quick question for you.
Yes, ma'am.
We experienced something I didn't know was possible recently in our Central Florida area, which was a CCRC closing its skilled nursing facility.
Yeah.
I didn't even know that was even possible. These are families that had paid in 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, $120,000. And they were given anywhere from a 30 to a 60-day notice.
Yep.
I
Yeah.
kind of poked around trying to find out how much of a fight we could put up with that. Where would you think I could find the best information about that? I didn't really find anything that was particularly helpful.
Okay. So the Agency for Healthcare Administration, first off, let me just say something. Number one, I'm not an expert on continuing care requirement communities. Their statute is Florida Statute 651, and that's the one that handles all of the front end agreements. Now, I know they're licensed by the agency, so I know when an agency closes, or when an ALF or when a licensed facility closes, the agency has set guidelines on how to close, like a 45-day, when an ALF closes, there's at least a 45-day notice to the resident. And then there's a 10-day notice to ACA, blah, blah, blah. It's all in regulations. I may not have quoted it specifically, but that's probably it. Now, you got to also remember a couple of things. Certain portions of what licensed facilities do are their information subject to public record. For example, an application for assisted living, there is one part of the application that is subject to public record, but the healthcare addendum form that identifies all of the players in the game by social security number and all that stuff, that's not something that is accessible. So that would probably be my first. That would be my thought on that CCRC. I'm familiar with what you're talking about, and I've trained people from there and other ones for years and years and years. So, good question.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'm not a nursing home guy either.
Yeah, I was so surprised because once, you paid into the CCRC, the whole concept was, that was a one and done, and they could go from the cottages to the ALF to the SNF. And I
Yep.
didn't, for some reason, I had it under the impression that it was almost similar to life insurance or insurance where the insurance commissioner is involved, because they have to have.
That is part of it. I think
Right.
the front end agreements on the front end, I think, have some type of oversight by the Department of Insurance.
Yeah.
Again, it's not really my expertise on that particular area of regulations. I kind of pigeonhole myself to assisted living. It's enough to learn. Yeah, it's like Medicaid. I'm not really up on that either. And that's on purpose. So, and that sounds bad, but Medicaid's such a difficult, anyway, another story. Let's go back. Documentation really quick. And this is the thing about documentation that I'm going to say it's going to be very limited. The first thing is about contracts and facility agreements. In our regulations in 429 and 59A36, there is sections that pertain to the residency agreements and the contracts that we offer for people for assisted living. Those minimum standards are requirements, and they're boilerplate for a lot of them. It talks about refund policies and making a claim against a refund and timeframes for it, issuing a refund within 45 days of transfer, discharge, or death. The amount of refund calculated by the date the unit is cleared of all belongings. No, we're not Goodwill. We don't take donations. Thank you. Anything related to contracts. Some of the other things that I know that are barriers to admission, and I'm not going to get into it in detail. I'm only going to explain to you why, and that's where an attorney would get involved. One of the things that is additional that's voluntary to contracts or arbitration clauses. And, I've had more than one guardian balk or hesitate at arbitration clauses, and I certainly do not blame anybody. This is not a infomercial for them. I will share with you the main reason why they are there is the liability insurance companies require it. And of course, I reached out because I had somebody who asked if we could remove that. And my insurance company said if we did and something went wrong, then it would create issues with the insurance claim. So whether that's right or wrong, I believe it to be true because the person who told me this is somebody I've worked with for 25 years. And if I told you his name and said, look up the word gentleman in the dictionary, his name would be there right next to Nick's. So
Just to let you know, the reason why most guardians don't want to sign that arbitration clause, because what we're doing essentially is giving up the civil right of one of our wards
understood.
without court authority. And when I mentor guardians, I tell them, get your attorney to send you an email that says you can agree to arbitration as the guardian of a ward appointed by the state of Florida.
Okay.
If you've got an email from your attorney as a guardian that says you can do that, then that's something to consider. I took the position as a guardian for almost the entire time I worked that I'm not signing them. And if it prevents admission, then so be it. But I don't believe I have the legal right to give up any of the legal rights that my ward is naturally born with. So the courts don't take away the right to them to have due process. So arbitration does. So I don't know what everybody else does, but that's why I took that position. And
all right. And I don't disagree with you at all. And I'll just share with you, I did research this, and everything I find from a legal standpoint that I can research and find talks about nursing homes and things like that. It's one of those areas that's very difficult. I don't wade through it, but I get it. I brought it up because I know it's a barrier to admission, which doesn't mean that I agree or disagree. It's an identified barrier that keeps people. As far as other documentation is concerned, I could go through all of that 100 times over. Really what happens with documentation, for example, unless you have an LNS or ECC license, or unless a person's let's go back. There's only certain documentation required based on who the resident is. For hospice, there's the interdisciplinary care plan, there's the admission paperwork and progress notes. For LNS and ECC, it requires a nursing assessment monthly by an RN. Oh boy, I'm having a brain cloud here for a minute. For limited mental health, there's a community living support plan. Service plans are required for ECC. Care plans are not necessarily required under a standard license. Care plans are typically by policy. Now, a recent change in our regulations regarding bed rails and assisted devices just occurred. There was a change in law, July 1, 2020, and a subsequent change in the administrative code, August 16th of 2021, that changed the definition of physical restraints and included a definition of an assistive device. What happened with this changes is they redefined half bed rails, full bed rails, and geriatric chairs as an assistive device. And they said Posey restraints are absolutely forbidden. Now, a Posey restraint is used in two cases in healthcare. One is in inpatient psych to restrain somebody to a chair so they do not get up and encroach on the personal space of the other 35 people in there who may be psychotic, which I spent 1 year inpatient psych, so I experienced it. In fact, the one young lady ran down the hall with her chair strapped to her backside, which sounds comical unless you were there. She was also the first elopement I ever had in healthcare too. She got out at 1 a.m. But the bottom line is that the half bed rail, full bed rail, and geriatric chair still requires a physician's order and signed consent. But now, if a resident can no longer remove or avoid a half bed rail, a full bed rail, or a geriatric chair, it's considered a restraint. And now a care plan has to be required, written. Physician's order, the care plan has to have all these things about monitoring the condition of the resident. Are they anxious? Is there any physical issues, any mental health issues that result from being restrained, like somebody being in a geri chair where they cannot remove or avoid that tray and they can't get in and out of it, like what happened with my dad at the hospital. They gave him Ativan, which had the opposite effect, and he was just all over the place. So what it means is that really by policy, not by regulation, regulation means, well, let me see, it's not a requirement to allow physical restraints in your ALF. It is by policy. Some ALFs say absolutely none, then it means absolutely none. Some have different modifications for it. The bottom line is, if a resident cannot remove or avoid a half bed rail, a full bed rail, a geriatric chair, or any other device that might be used as a restraint, then it would be a restraint and not an assisted device. So here's the example. You have a resident on hospice. They have a scoop mattress and full bed rails. They're bedridden. That bedridden resident under hospice with full bed rails would not be able to remove or avoid those bed rails without some form of assistance. So therefore, they would be physically restrained. And a care plan would be required if the facility or the ALF allows it. Otherwise, they would have to receive notice. And that's what came out of our regulations. And here's the thing, we are just now currently getting feedback on how the agency is handling this. And I just went through my survey in Sanford, which was deficiency free, thank you. And our policy was reviewed and found adequate. So, proud of that one. Of course, my administrator said if she got a deficiency, she would probably be fired because she works for me, because there's zero tolerance on deficient practice in my building if I can help it. I'm not there all the time. And by the way, I have somebody, Stacy Hartley, who is my major person who runs the operations there. So here's what I want to get to, and there's a ton of other things I could tell you about regs, and I'll leave some time open. I know you guys, we got a little bit of late start here and things like that, and I'll stick around as long as they'll have me. Best practices for conflict resolution. Well, here's just a few samples. I have a rule in my buildings that our staff have to follow the chain of command. They got a complaint, it starts with the chain of command, and it doesn't get to the person to the top until it goes through that. And I think the same thing happens in everybody's world. Some people feel like they can just sidestep that and go around the corner. And I mean, I have a lot of vendors who think they can get in my building wherever I work at because they know me, and I assure them I'm not the one who makes I'm not the decision maker in there. So chain of command is important, and if I have somebody who comes to me as the administrator of an ALF, if I have somebody who's unhappy, whether it's a family member or a resident or a guardian or service provider, any of that, I want to make sure that the chain of command has been followed so that as the administrator, we can make sure we work through this with the people to make sure we get resolution. Unfortunately, some people are not great problem solvers in the ALF world. And I think sometimes when there's an issue with the resident, one of the first issues they think to deal with it is to just get rid of it and discharge people. And that's always the very final thing on my list. But I think ALFs, and this is something I teach, it's what we call the Peta Principle. You see, when people complain, regardless of who we are, there's an initial emotional response. And we all know on this Zoom today that we have people who are constant complainers, that when they send us a complaint, our first emotional response is, Oh, no, not again. Or they are a pain in the, Now, when I teach this dealing with difficult families, which is part of the Peta Principle, most people think I mean a pain in the you know what, but no, it means patience, because we certainly have to be patient with people, and there's lots of reasons why. Information, you know what I find 9 times out of 10, people are not informed enough coming in the door. Because, for some reason, the Carvana concept has been applied to long-term care. Bring them over, we'll try them before we buy them. And I've never been an advocate of that ever in my whole life. And of course, what they're told sometimes coming in the door and what that equivalates to the nurse who ends up taking care of the people are sometimes different for various reasons. And then, of course, trust has got to be a whole part of this thing. If they can't trust us, how can we take care of their family member? And then awareness. And the awareness part is the one that I like, because I think as all of us here, when we're dealing with a difficult person, difficult ward's family, difficult ALF resident, family, whoever it is, I think if we sit back after the first initial response of, oh my, that if we understand the reasons why and what makes what's happening, it is certainly a little, having understanding and not agreeing is better than not having any understanding and not agreeing. Example, I had a guy tell him his mother was wandering, he needed to go to memory care, and the next thing you know, he blew up in my office, called me every name, called my mom every name. As I was escorting him from my building, his wife, who was a doctor, I said to her, who are her doc? What gives? And she says, Tom, it's time for somebody else to be his whipping post. And they left the building. We found a small ALF. She thrived there, lived and died there. Everybody was happy. But the reality I got was he'd been beaten up on his wife emotionally because of his issues dealing with his mom's aging in place and her decline. And she went ahead and let him burst out on me because she was tired of it. And after that, I understood it better than I ever had before. But I think if I could tell anybody here today, the key to understanding anybody's profession, and I think one of the keys to understanding what we do in the ALF world, and me understanding what you all do as guardians, which, Teresa, I'm going to have to get a brush up course. I need to come see you and Nick anyway.
Come see us, but you don't need a brush up course.
Well, we can still talk. We can talk over dinner.
Okay.
But I think expanding your knowledge base is very, very important.
It
Some
is.
people call me an expert, and I kind of cringe when that happens, because I think experts know everything, and I do not think I'll ever leave this planet with knowing everything there is about assisted living.
Well, nobody will. Tom, another question I have. So
Yep.
I have used somewhat successfully sometimes the Ombudsman world for conflicts, often between the family of the ward, which, by the way, that's why the guardianship exists to begin with. That's the reason why I'm even involved.
Right.
But I never really know. And of course, everything changed during COVID. We couldn't get the ombudsman to do what they used to do, which was I would ask that they would meet me, the family, and maybe the facility administrator at the same time when we could not work out whatever issues were going on. Do the ombudsman actually have anything to do with the license of adult family care or ALF or not?
No, they absolutely. Okay, licensure process. First off, as far as the licensure process, ombudsman doesn't come in until a license is issued. After that, they come in at least annually to do a resident rights survey. And just so you know, the document that the ombudsman utilize, that is available online. It's their assessment form for assisted living in adult family care home. And people say, hey, Tom, when the ombudsman come into the ALF, what are they looking for? So, well, download their assessment form and you'll see exactly the areas they're looking for, because it's all based on the resident bill of rights. The other ways they come in is when there's a complaint on a resident's rights violation. And when a complaint on a resident rights violation is founded, they have to call ACA and make a referral, then ACA comes out. So ombudsmen, who are by and large volunteers, they're not surveyors and they cannot cite us for anything, but they could find a potential resident rights violation under the Resident Bill of Rights to be founded and refer it to the agency. You know, the reality is that they've just started getting back into the process again because of the last 2 years of COVID. I'm sure they lost a lot of ombudsmen, and because the majority of them are volunteers, you know, finding people to replace, you know, volunteers to go into healthcare facilities today, even with the presence of COVID, I can see why people are a little bit ambivalent. But I'll just share this little fact with you that most people don't know, is that in July 1 of 2020, under Florida statute 429.28, the Resident Bill of Rights, under parens J, okay, they added a clause to the discharge notice for resident rights that says when an ALF provides discharge notice to the resident or the legal guardian, it's all in that section, that we must now include the language that says you may contact the statewide ombudsman in Tallahassee and ask for assistance with placement. Most people don't know that exists in the law, which they effectively made the ombudsman a placement service. So we tried it out. We called up Tallahassee and said, hey, we need help with this placement, and the Resident Bill of Rights I have say that you guys will help us. And they didn't know what we were talking about.
I've never tried that.
Well, it's in
That
the
was an option.
it's in the regulations. I assure you, I didn't make it up.
Okay.
You know, I really didn't make it up. And I don't think they even know it, which that's kind of worrisome. But yeah, we look at the, you know, the ombudsman is the word is Swedish for advocate, my understanding. Bottom line is that in a perfect world, and the way it really is administered, having them come in and assist us with our wards in the facility, and or even with families like you were talking about, that's part of what they're supposed to do. So if you have an ombudsman that won't do that, everybody has recourse. You can always complain and file a complaint against them. And if you do, it doesn't have to be, you know, it can be anonymous if you choose to. Most ALFs will never complain about ombudsman or surveyors because they're afraid. But again, you know, it's just like anything else. And as guardians, I'm sure you're aware of the fact that we have posted information on where to file a complaint. So I'm sure you went through all the process. Real quick, there is a very good abuse, neglect, and exploitation guide for professionals that you can download off of DCF's Adult Protective Services website. It's a very comprehensive guidebook. It takes you through the process. I use it for our training programs because we're required to train abuse, neglect, and exploitation as mandatory reporters. And I'm sure you're all mandatory reporters as well. There's grievance procedures to follow and filing a grievance and following up on those policies. Some of the big ALFs have the corporate number where you can call and complain. You know, again, I'm a chain of command person, and it starts, you know, with the people who are involved. And a lot of times it's with the facility administrator, and then from there. Any questions on regulations, a problem you have, I'm open and available. I know we're 5 minutes past it, and I'm at your leisure.
Just Tom, the one you just mentioned, do you know the actual reference of where that is?
What's that one?
You just mentioned the one for the mandatory reporters for professional.
I'll tell you what, shoot me an email. I'll send you a copy.
Okay, great. And then what we'll do is we'll get Julie or Golda to send you an email. You send it to them, and then we'll distribute it out to all of our.
Sure. Let me write myself a note. So
Yep.
The A&E guide. Do you all want a copy of the current regs?
Sure, why not torture us?
Okay, I'll send you something.
All righty. So I want to real quick look through. We've got more people that came at the end of the meeting. I'm not gonna, sometime during the meeting, I'm not going to do the introduction, but if anyone wants to ask a question, if you want to put it in chat, if you want to wave your hand, if you'd like to discuss anything about what we're learning from Tom. I'm kind of looking through the galley here.
There's nothing on the chat that I can see.
No, me neither. Julie or Golda, do you know if this was set for a 50-minute CEU? I believe that's correct. I just want to make sure. 50.
This is my contact information, by the way. And you see that voicemail? You
Yeah.
can text that. You can call it, you'll get a voicemail. Rarely does this person ever answer this. Now, when Teresa comes up on there, I answer it for her.
I'm in
Okay,
trouble.
this is the office, and that's where you'll get my Teresa, who's spelled Trisa and not the Teresa. And of course, my direct email, you're more than welcome to reach out to me. So if you guys want to chat further and there's no questions.
Any questions? Anybody? I've been doing this a long time, and I've heard Tom talk multiple times, and I learned something today that I didn't know. I did not know that we were cool with moving someone into a SNF, into an ALF, when they were hospice or directly on hospice. I didn't know we could do that. I am thrilled because I deal with that on a regular basis. All right, we have a question. Lona says, would Tom be able to file a complaint when Ombudsman refuses to help with placement? Huh? Go ahead, Tom. Remember, we're being recorded.
Okay, so let me just share something with you. I have to work with these people. So as an outside consultant and trainer who is certified under the Agency for Healthcare Administration, I would never, ever be able to get involved in something like that because I have to work with them. I would just tell you, you need to call the statewide ombudsman to do it.
Huh?
Okay.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I have attorneys in Tallahassee that are, when I say, let's go kick Aka's butt, back, this was years ago before I knew better. It's like, well, no, Tom, and I'm not going to do that because, I have to work with him. The two attorneys I use are both former ACA attorneys anyway. So,
wow.
Yeah.
So I want to talk for a second about an experience I had many years ago, which still sort of stays with me. I was placing a client in a relatively big corporate ALF, and their regulations were one dog between 20 and 40 pounds, or less than 40 pounds. That was the regulation. This particular client happened to have an amazing dog of a breed that I happen to know the breed well. And she was a professional trainer back in her, when she had capacity, and the dog was trained beyond perfect. Does Aka have anything to say about pets, or is that strictly policy of the ALF? Does Aka have anything to say?
Okay. So as far as pet policy is concerned, the agency has no oversight, particularly over pet policies. Because pet policies, the regulations that govern pet policies, where we would start. If somebody said, Tom, where are you going to start your pet policy? Well, you'll find that in the Florida Administrative Code called 64E-12, which is Department of Health, Animal Safety. It's towards the back of the chapter. And it gives you the guidelines for pets. It says rabies, flea control, internal parasites, aggressive venomous animals are not in residence room. They can be, they're not allowed in the building, or in the residence room, and all that kind of stuff, which snakes are going to be the new pet of the future, I'm sure. But that's where it starts. The other part of that is going to be, they would look at for policies is the ADA guidelines on service animals, which only are dogs or miniature horses. And I always like that part. Reminds me of the Young Frankenstein and Frau Blucher, for those of you who ever saw that movie. But the bottom line, those are the guidelines. Is Leslie laughing? Yeah, Blucher. Do you know it means glue in German? That's why the horses are what neighing. But anyway, little trivia. That's stuff you hear in my class. But the bottom line is that's where it starts. These size requirements and all that other stuff, that's part of by choice. And what I would tell people is my policy would include a waiver. My policy would include a waiver that says under certain circumstances and with permission from whoever, blah, 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 then a waiver could be applied for. And if it's accepted, then it would waive the policy. Waivers are like waivers, Medicaid waivers. We're not following the Fed's guidelines specifically, yada, yada, yada. So again, this is something, Tracy, that I just added to my physical restraints policy because my first policy said absolutely not. My new policy allows a waiver to be considered, and that has to go to our executive committee for final review. And in my building, that basically is Stacy and finally me.
Okay.
So under certain conditions, we might consider it. With pets, I think people are shooting themselves in the foot when they do that, especially as you were telling me. I doubt if he would have had that problem with me. Same thing with medical marijuana. ALF said, "Oh, we'll not accept anybody who takes medical marijuana." Well, they're changing their name, their tune now, because if they're losing people. Simple.
Okay.
And of course, an empty bed pays nothing.
Right.
Which is part of the problem.
The end of that story was this dog was well into the 140-pound range.
Yeah.
Which most people might have a heart attack about, but because it was such a well-trained dog, and we knew this, I actually had the dog at my house for a couple of weeks during one of her hospital stays. So I knew the dog at great level. The facility allowed me to place the dog there, and the dog became the kind of like the diplomat of the building, because it was taught that when a small dog, a little Shih Tzu or a little Chihuahua came up to it, that it was to go down in Sphinx position and stay down, which it did. It just was a fantastic trained dog. So, pets for a lot of our wards is a complicated thing. 10, 15, 20 years ago, it was really hard to find placement for a ward with a pet because they really couldn't take care of the pet. On top of the fact that, it wasn't just the pet, the client really wasn't able to. So now that many facilities have an additional addendum or rider or addition that I can pay for the cat litter and for the dog walking and so forth. And so it's just something to consider as a guardian. And I don't know that everybody knows that no doesn't always mean no when it comes to the size of a dog. So
I'm just going to share this with you. If you haven't noticed, there's been a whole bunch of new ALFs being built out there. And now guess what? They're still calling me up, wanting me to help them with their license. And I'm thinking, this is insanity. Because they think that us baby boomers are going to have the money to move in there. And all I can share with you is I don't plan on having a drop of money when the time I'm done. I probably won't make it there anyway. So, most of us of my generation, we partied our butts off till we were thought we'd never see 30. And now we're 63 this year. And,
how'd that happen?
Who knows? Got the skin of an 85-year-old man. But bottom line is that, ALFs have had to open up they're thinking about admissions because they're losing residents. And of course, there's a business side to everybody's business. Okay. And, and if we can't make ends meet, we can't care for people. I think what you're going to see is a few ALFs close over the next 5 years, especially some of the older ones. I think the state's going to shut a few of them down. And I know for a fact they're going to get rid of a few people who are bad players in the game. There's one getting ready to leave the state here soon.
Good.
And usually when the ACA requires that, they usually have to agree that they won't come back.
Wow.
Yep.
All right, guys, it is 4:45. I'd love to have some more questions before we sign off. So you can chat, raise your hand, or start talking. Does anybody else have they want to pick out of Tom's brain? All right. Nope. We got thank you for excellent presentation.
You're welcome, Lona.
Chat. Anybody else want to ask anything or talk about anything else?
I
No?
do.
Go ahead, Diana, please.
It's not about ALS, it's about malpractice insurance. Is this a good time, or do you want me to do it another time?
Stand by for just a second. We're going to turn off recording. So guys, we're about to turn off recording, which means this will be